Welcome back to another episode of Flipping the Lid. You know what we do here. We look inside the stories that have shaped some of the most significant and successful people in this world. And sometimes I have the chance to know them before they're here, and other times I don't. But I had the pleasure of taking a few moments this morning to look into this incredible woman that's going to be with us today. You know, her story through a variety of different industries and how she's had to reinvent herself and apply lessons from prior periods in her life to her current, existing, and future period. How she's really helping individuals understand to control the controllables, and how you can really build effective relationships and create strong connections that are going to take you forward. She has invested significantly in herself, and over the course of the pandemic, invested significantly in the community that she serves the most to ensure that business owners were able to actually get all the way through. And so those are little pieces about who she is. We'll get a lot more detail here in just a second, but Anne, so nice to have you with us.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Well, given that I don't know you, I'm hopeful that that intro resonated at least for you, but that's what I gleaned from what I was able to find.
No, that was great. So thank you so much.
Beautiful. Well, that's how I see you from our little interactions, but why don't you let us know who you are in your words?
Yes, so I'm an accountant by trade. I'm a CPA. I grew up not your typical accountant background. I actually grew up, my first dream was to play competitive golf, so play professional golf. That was really my focus all through high school and college. And then my father died suddenly when I was in college. So I kind of had this gut check moment of, you know, what do you want to do in life? And I really feel like looking back, that was one of the things where you had to take control of your own life, right? Like it could go off the rails pretty quickly. But really what I did was, you know, really wanted to finish out the golf dream because that had been my dream all growing up. And so by my senior year of college, I was ranked 11th in the country. And so I had the opportunity to turn pro, which was really kind of one of those moments where you're like, okay, like this definitely proved hard work pays off and all of those, you know, tough times. And it was great. And I played professional golf for a year. But I quickly realized that, you know, it had been one of these things that I wanted to try, but it really had never been something that I could see myself doing over my whole life or as an adult. And so I kind of looked around and it's, you know, all my peers were going and traveling and talking about golf and the golf swing and where the club angle is. And I was like, you know, like, I'm just not that person. Like, I'm not that technical with this. And what I always loved was the idea of traveling the country. You know, in golf, it's unique in the sport because you meet a lot of business owners. Like a lot of the people in the towns we would be in would be, you know, the guy who owns the pizza restaurant or the guy who owns the car dealership. And, you know, and so I loved those interactions and I loved hearing their life, like seeing how they had made it to where they were. My parents had no money. I mean, I was, you know, like literally just put on a plane and like, go stay with this person because it was the 90s and you could, right? I don't think you would ever do that now, but you know, but it was
I had a few of those trips in the 90s as well. I'm there with you.
It's like, yeah, I'm going to fly to Oklahoma and like, I'll call you, maybe not. So, but you know, what a life lesson. But I loved like all the people that I would stay with and see their life. And so when I was out, you know, pursuing the dream the first year, I'm like, you know, I really don't, this isn't my passion, but there's something here that is, and I just need to figure it out. And so I went home. One of the hardest discussions I ever had was with my golf pro who had just thought, well, hey, we're going to be pros for like 5 years. And I'm like, yeah, you know, I think I'm going to go and study accounting. Like that's really where the dream is. But I did. And then worked in, you know, public accounting once I finished my master's degree and realized right away how different my background was from, you know, most people who wanted to be accountants their whole life. But I realized that, you know, what I was really good at was understanding that other side of the fence, right? Like, so, you know, I'm doing a tax return for a person, but I know this is a real person because I've probably been in their house, right? Like I know their life, I know what they're looking for. And I think that's always really been probably one of my best qualities as an accountant is I just have empathy for that other side. And that's always been my guiding force. And, you know, that was really the dream behind starting my own business was finding a way to build a better relationship between accountants and business owners and taking that strength and using it.
I love it. So, Anne, I asked you who you were, and what was really cool is that you told us a lot about what you do. But what I also picked up on, and I want to say this just like with complete love, is that you also integrated a lot of the human experience that is important to you, that demonstrates who you are through your business and what you do, right? The empathy, compassion, connection with others, your ability to reflect back on the past. You clearly absorbed it all. But I do want to call attention to, because I know that above all, you're also a loving mom, wife, and parent of 2 dogs. And what I can tell just by your just unbelievable energy and the way that you move through the world is you care a lot about creating impact through the things that you do in your life, particularly impact for others. So would you talk a little bit about that for just a moment?
Yeah, so I think, I think one of the things that I feel like I have a unique perspective in life, just in the fact that the timing of when I lost my dad, I think it just has always resonated with me that life is incredibly short. And so I would say my tolerance for BS is very little, because that's where, it's been. And it's funny because I recently lost a family member who was close suddenly. And it sort of reminded me of like how impactful that was, because I was 20 when my dad passed away. And I think that's always just really been my thing, of really trying to make the most of every day and be the best person I can be every day, and not settling for a bad month, because life is really short.
Yeah. I think a healthy relationship with mortality, whether it's an individual brush with death or losing someone very close and like your, most intimate relationships, it does shift perspective and point us towards what's important. And some people, it causes them to stay stuck, and others, it causes them to move. You were clearly in this time in college when you lost him. You were still on this path and trajectory to be a professional golfer. You say you were fortunate because it caused you to pause for just a moment. Take us back to that time, the time when you were losing your father and you still had this path to become a professional golfer. What were you feeling, and what were the thoughts that were being shaped in that time to drive you forward?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was just, first, like, it was a shock because my dad had suddenly hit a massive stroke. So it was just this, like, instant, like, wow, how fragile life is. I don't think you realize when you're 20. But then in a weird way, it was like, okay, now from here on out, like, these are my decisions, right? Like, not that like my parents weren't important, but it's, it's like, all right, well, if this is going to happen, then like, I really need to understand the path that I'm on and make sure that it's my path. And at first I wasn't sure if I would ever play golf again. I wasn't sure really what I wanted to do, but I realized that, I love the game of golf, and I really needed some outlet, because actually what I hated the most was socializing, right? Because it's like, you don't want to go in a room and talk to people about how much they hate their parents, because you're like, really, I don't have sympathy for you. So golf was a really good outlet. And, what I feel like people come into your lives, like, just at amazing times. And, my golf coach, he was not my golf coach, didn't know me before my dad died. And I had just talked to a friend who knew a pro in the area, and he's like, well, I think he lost his dad young, so you guys might have a connection there. And I'm an only child, so I really had like not many people to talk to about what was going on. And I mean, just what a amazing coincidence to have run into this person, because he basically turned to me and he's like, look, I know exactly where you are. I know you're going to be a mess for like a year. So in that time, we're going to rebuild your golf swing, and I'm not going to charge you for it. You're just going to show up when I tell you to come practice. And if you do that, then this is going to work out. And it was like, never asked, like, we didn't go down like emotional, roads. It was all about the golf swing. But that, I think, healed me in a way that I wouldn't have otherwise gotten to. So I'm forever grateful to having that relationship at that time in my life.
Thank you for sharing that. I don't believe in coincidence, and I believe that everything always happens for a reason. We just don't always know right away. And what's very clear in that situation is, yes, I do believe that people have seasons in our lives. Sometimes people have multiple seasons, right? Come and go and enter, but inevitably everyone that crosses our path always has some level of meaning. And what's beautiful in this is that he moved clearly, understanding where you were coming from, to a place of giving you a safe container that you didn't have to focus on anything other than your golf swing. And so though he didn't guide you through the emotional path, he set an expectation. It's going to be at least a year. I'm sure that though you two didn't talk about it, he was encouraging you to be doing what you needed to do to heal outside of that container. But that was probably a place that you felt most safe and protected in that time in your life, because he allowed you to escape all the other processing that you really couldn't escape.
Right. Yeah, it was incredible.
Can you expand on that relationship a little bit and the impact it had on you and the lessons it's taught you that you've applied into future relationships?
Yeah, I mean, I think, one of the big things was the idea that, I mean, first, I think you're right on expectation, right? Like, I think there's a lot of people at that time who you would be feeling sorry for you, or like, oh, don't put a lot of pressure on yourself. But, it's a really bad situation no matter what you do. So I think that idea of like, yeah, you're going to be a mess, but we still are going to strive to be better, strive to be the best. I mean, I think that really, transformed my path, because it was like, here's this person who doesn't care that I was crying this morning. Like, I still have to show up and do my best, and really never like had lower expectations, always higher. And I really think that that's what drove me to transform my expectations of myself, because he never like felt bad for me or thought there was any reason why I couldn't go beat the girl from Duke, right? So, I mean, just that idea of like, oh, well, maybe he's not wrong. Like, maybe I can go out and be one of the best in the country. And like, why wouldn't I think I could, So I really think that probably resonated the most at that time, and has always sort of guided me to be like, well, why do I think that the player from Duke's better? Like, is she better? No. She's, if anything, had it a little easier in the last couple of years. So, so I think that transformed, my thought process.
That's so powerful, though, because I do think that what you've learned through this process, too, is the ability to challenge your both emotional and intellectual narratives that often prohibit the way we can see the world more clearly. And you, in this really beautiful situation, articulate this removal of expectations because of what you were able to actually understand in that period. I know that I still struggle with the removal of expectations. It's something that I know that I struggle with, and I'm conscious about my effort to remove expectations from people, situations, outcomes, whenever possible. What expectations do you still hold for yourself sometimes in life?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, I think I expect a lot of myself, for better or worse.
I get that sense. Yeah. You hold a pretty high standard for yourself.
Yeah. Which I think, is who you are, right? But I think, I think I always want to, whatever I'm doing, just really feel that I did my best. And I think that is, my expectation of myself every day.
I love it. So I would argue that you're probably known for work ethic. And I think that even early on, as it related to your golf trajectory, you talked about your understanding of what work ethic can produce. How do you maintain that drive?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I feel like I love being a business owner, first of all. I love being an entrepreneur. I love what I do every day. I really do. And I think that helps in that, right? Like, I really don't feel like I ever get burnt out, because I really love what I'm able to do with my clients. And I do feel like, the last 3 years, the COVID time was incredibly impactful for us, because we're 90% restaurants. So, in 2019, I mean, we built a business model around hospitality, just because that was sort of what I knew. I had grown up working in golf courses. I had worked at restaurants on the weekend to make money. So I knew, you're a hospitality owner. And then when COVID hit, it was really impactful for us, because our model is monthly, like we get paid every month. So I wasn't sure if April 2020, would the Largo Group survive? Is everyone just going to cancel, their subscription with us? We have no annual contracts. Like, are we just going to be disposable? And when we weren't, it really made me motivated even more to say, okay, they've chosen to keep us on when they could easily say, I don't need you. So clearly this is working. And it really became my driving force to help our clients and find the path forward and educate them on what needed to be done to change their model. Because I think so much of what's changed in hospitality is it's a fundamentally different business than it was 3 years ago. And that's a really hard time to be in any industry, but especially hospitality, because most business owners don't really have a finance background, or, they're more creative, right? They love making the food, or they love,
Yep.
the guest experience. And so to have a model that's completely transformed, has really been my driving force to make sure that we are delivering and helping people see the other side of that.
I just really like the way you articulate your experience and bring it into the world. It's really awesome to listen to you talk about where you've come from, where you continue to go. Obviously another fundamental that I think golf probably gave you is that golf, you're training by simulating course conditions. You're constantly going through reps. You have to have a short memory. And so I'm curious, how have all of those skill sets that to get to number 11 in the country, you have to be able to capture. How does that translate to business and life for you?
Well, it's funny because when I first left golf for accounting, I really was like, well, they're so different. Like, I'm not really going to think about, golf. Yeah. This is my new career. And it really wasn't until COVID that I started to see the similarities in mindset. Because you'd have two people who have the exact same situation, right? They're both in Midtown Manhattan. They're completely shut down. They have no hope of, things getting better tomorrow. And yet you had one person who's like, you know what, this is the best thing that could have happened, because I'm going to get market share, and I'm going to go and I'm going to get, one of my restaurants in every corner. And you have the same person who has the same situation who just can't mentally see the forest for the trees. Like, they just cannot see a brighter day. And it was like, wow, golf, if you've ever played golf, is so mental and just so like gut wrenching at times, right? Like, you practice all month and you get to the first tee and you hit two balls in the water. Like, I seriously remember my worst golf story was my coach, the one who gave up years of his life, flew to New York to watch me play in the first U.S. Amateur that I qualified for. And the first hole, I hit two golf balls in the water.
Oh, my goodness.
This is awful, right? Like, so I felt like that gut wrenching, but yet in golf, you have to figure out, like, you have to get on the hole number 2 with everyone watching and be like, here we go. Like, I have to reset. And I think in business, there's times where as an owner, you don't realize, like, hey, I have to reset. Like, I am causing my business more pain by living in this bad mental space. And so I realized, like, during COVID, like, this is very similar mental stuff, but as business owners, we have to remember that. Like, it's a train like we would, a competitive round of golf, because we influence our teams, we influence our customers, the vibe we give out, like, all of that makes a difference. And so many times we allow a bad day to turn into a bad week, and we just don't hold ourselves to that standard. And so I definitely believe now that there are a lot of similarities between any sport, right?
Oh, yeah.
And owning a business.
But I do think golf in particular, I mean, you're literally trying to simulate the conditions that you could have in any variety of courses that's different in every single case, which, by the way, is no different than the relationships we have in business. We can simulate how to be empathetic and compassionate, but then the first time that someone comes in as an asshole, or they've got their armor so far up that we can't get through, right? We all of a sudden, it's like we're sitting in the sand trap and we don't know how the hell we're going to get out, right?
Yeah.
And so that's the reality. Is you call golf mental, business mental, and it is, right? I have to say, though, I often think that mental gets this overly focused rap because it's also emotional. It's also physical, and it's about the integration of those three things and the spiritual to allow us to bring things into the world. That's my belief, right? And I believe that if I'm carrying emotional weight or pain, it's going to impact me mentally, it's going to impact me physically, and it'll definitely impact me spiritually. And so golf is very mental because you want to be stoic and unemotional on the course. But what inevitably happens? You shank a ball, you go in the water twice in a row, and all of a sudden you're triggered and you've got to like deregulate quickly and diffuse. And so one of my favorite quotes is from a friend of mine, Alex Sharfin. He says, if you're constantly putting out fires in your business and life, there's a good chance you're the arsonist. Now, I've heard it, and I often say that you're responsible for everything. Obviously, we need to find the place of ownership and anything in our business. Just like you said, if you as the business owner are causing more pain in your business, it is what it is. I believe we need to identify and embrace pain to avoid suffering in our life, business, and health. It's understanding how do we identify those pains that we can embrace on a daily basis to ultimately avoid suffering in the long term. It's no different on a golf course, and it's no different in business. And so you talk about this pain. I'm curious, how do you identify the pain that develops in your world? And how do you use your lessons to be able to reflect that back to your clients to shorten their curve to seeing it faster themselves?
Yeah. No, I mean, I think you're right that, being aware of triggers and being aware of what really is bothering you is the first step. I think a lot of times in business, we just, brush it off, and then it's to our own detriment. We don't, deal with it. So for me, I think, the hardest part in any relationship is just the idea that, like, you let someone down or you didn't meet their expectations. I think that's always like a big trigger for me. But
expectations again.
Right. I mean, I have high expectations.
It's weird how these things pattern into our world, right?
Yes. But, I think what I try to do is just be realistic, right? If you think about it, you can't meet everybody's expectations. Sometimes it's an unrealistic one, so it just wasn't talked about. But whatever it is, like you said, having a better, I think, a healthy understanding of like, that's their expectation and this is mine. And so I definitely think it's something that I work on every day, and really try to just not, take it personally or anything like that, but just try to really say, like, at the end of the day, did I do what I intended to do? Did I do it my best? And if I didn't, I think the other thing where sports are so great and business, we can beat ourselves up is in sports. If you think about it, right? Like I got on the next tee and I had to hit the ball. Like I just had to, right? Like you had to let that go. Because I knew there's no other way around this other than just looking forward. Where I think in business, we could have something we're thinking about 3 months later and we're still just like, hashing it out in our head for no good purpose. But in sports, we have to move forward every day. So I think in business, it's like finding a way to just be like, we are different today because we're better than we were yesterday. So let's look forward and move on.
I love how focused you are on obviously growth and progress and celebrating that even over the outcome, because clearly you said it earlier, work ethic showed you what could be produced by strong work ethic. You know that if you put in the reps and you put in the work, the outcome will ultimately be inevitable, even though you can't guarantee when it happens, how it happens, or frankly, even if it does. And so you're very strong on controlling what you can control. We hear that all the time. I have a similar belief system, but can you talk a little about what that means to you?
Yeah, I think the idea is just, I think just going back to your outlook in life of, at the end of the day, if I do everything that I know I can do, then just not allowing the outcome to be something that feels like I can't control it, right? Like I joke with my family, like I think I'm the one person if people are like, oh, I really hope I win the lottery. I'm like, I don't want to win the lottery. Like I really don't. I want to have something that like I built and I know the path and like, that to me is better than like just some random thing, right? Like I just want it to be something that I have worked towards and I know what we've done and we're just, continuing to evolve every day. So I definitely think that, it's what you can control, but it's also just feeling like because I think the best thing in life is progress, right? Like if you feel like you are getting better at something, that's when you're the happiest. And so to me, if that's where you're going in work, then you're going to enjoy your work.
I agree with that completely. I'm curious, what do you believe you have control over in your life?
I don't know. That's a good question. No, I think your outlook every day is everything you control the most, right? Like we joked off air, but it's like you have like yesterday it was just like not a controllable day, right? Like it was nothing bad, but it was just like wow, like I was just like reactive, right? And I think what I'm trying to do every year, but especially like the last couple of years, is just be more aware of like those times where you're just reacting instead of responding. And the times that you're ahead of your outlook for the day, I try to get up early. I try to, really take like an hour to work. I'm usually up by 4, then an hour to work out, like 5 to 6, and time with my kids, 6 to 7, and then I'm out the door for the day. And the days that I can do that, I feel like I'm in control of anything that there's nothing that's going to come around that turns me off, off kilter or whatever. Like, keeping in my mindset all day, regardless of the exterior.
Has control ever caused problems for you in your life?
Yes, in the golf swing. Yes, because as weird as it is, you can't be too controlling, right? So I think, yes, in my mindset, like the bad side of my mindset is I'm like too risk averse, right? Like I want things that I predict.
Mm-hmm.
And so like in sports and in life, that is your downfall, right? It's as good as it is bad because there are times where you just have to let it go, right? Like that is the biggest thing my coach used to always say is like, go down swinging, right? Like stop standing over the first tee worrying about it, like just swing. And I think that that's probably true in business and in life, that like there's times where I'm too, trying to plan everything out, and that can hurt.
It can hurt. I know I've existed in that space for a very long time in different areas in my life. And I've been trying to surrender control in lots of ways and allow the flow of life to kind of come. And that was one of the things that I tried to control, was my relationship with control and the things that I couldn't control. And it's all tied up into this concept of expectations. And so I would be really curious, because again, you talk about it so holistically. Are there areas in your life that you recognize you don't have control, that you're okay and have surrendered to the fact that you don't have control? And if so, what are they?
I mean, I think like with parenting, right? You realize you have less control, and really just trying to look, because I think parenting to me is, because I lost my dad early, like I think you really want to be aware that you don't want your kids to depend on you, right? Like you want them to be, they want you to love them and you love them, but you also want to make sure they're self-sufficient, because that is very important in life. And so I think to me as a parent, you're really trying to make sure that the things that they're doing, that they love to do, that it's not expectation from your parents. I mean, like my one son loves golf, but that's tricky because, like, does he love golf because he loves me, or does he just genuinely love golf? I think he loves golf and we would go play. But, there's that awareness, right? Like, he knows I love golf. And, we sort of like, we're still in contact with my golf coach. So it's like, he knows I love my golf coach. So it's like, there's a lot there. And so my biggest thing as a parent is I want to make sure that I step back and it's his life and it's not my life. And I think that, you're just trying to let them go and let them find what they like, what they don't like, and be along for the ride.
Yeah. I find that parenting has been probably the greatest period of growth in my life, because it's a forced reflection.
Yes.
It's funny, we talk because my daughter is a little clone of my wife, which means that I have 16 years of experience of knowing how to deal with her, even though my daughter's only 7, and vice versa. My son is a little clone of me, and they both have parts of both of us. But I know that they've definitely challenged me in ways that I didn't anticipate. And we do a lot of work. You'll find this out when we chat, and this concept of helping people put themselves into a position to be able to respond instead of react. And in so many cases, it was my children that caused me to start to see that reflection and the generational patterns that I was not only currently carrying myself, but I was unconsciously putting into them. You're putting clear conscious intention into allowing them to connect to what authentically drives them. I would be curious, though, what might have been some of the greatest lessons that you've learned as a result of being a parent, and where have you potentially seen some of those generational patterns show up, even though, right, your father has not really been around for a long time?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you that, I think you learn so much as a parent, and it is such a journey from the first moment that they're born. And I think it was surprising at first, like, how much it does have you reflect. Like if you had asked me before kids, I would have been like, no, you don't have time to do that, but you actually do. I mean, every milestone they're hitting, you're kind of remembering your milestones, remembering the good things, the things that you want to do better. And like you have, like my one son is very much like my husband. My other son is very much like me. And so that's kind of fun, because even though so my youngest is actually named Fraser, which was my maiden name, because I was the last Fraser, and then I was only child, so that was it. The name died, and it's so funny because he doesn't have a lot of interaction with the Fraser side, because my dad has passed away, and we're kind of close on his side, but there aren't a lot of males on the line, and he's so much like the genetic makeup of the Frasers, for better or worse. So to me, that's always like a really cool, like you said, like I think things happen for a reason. Like that's always like a really cool thing to see that it carries on, even though, my dad hasn't been there in 20 years. So, to me, that's always very nice. But I do think you're right that there's just so many things to learn in parenting and ways to just, move forward. It's amazing.
Yeah, it again, it always comes back to awareness. You said that earlier. It's something I'm sure that you and I align on, and because you can't be intentional with what you're unaware of. And, there's a lot of things that were reflected back to me in raising children that I'm not proud to admit I saw in myself.
Yeah.
And, I've had to create repair in places that I unintentionally created damage. And, going to the whole concept of like creating fires in life and business, I really was the source, right? Like, so for me, and I have this like strong belief that almost every problem in my life or negative emotion that I could be experiencing is something that if I turn inward enough and either understand the trash from my past that put it into this current moment, or I surrender my view of myself in this current time by removal of expectations, right? Like that I can then move and I can keep myself moving. But ultimately, it's always going to be my responsibility. May not be my fault, although often it is, but it's definitely my responsibility once I'm aware of it. I saw this really small clip, and I'm sure that it's out of context. And so I wanted to ask you about it because it didn't feel congruent to how I receive you today. And so I just really wanted to understand. I heard you say a comment that said, you said the problem isn't you, it's the system. And it was a small clip and it was out of context. But those words hit me because I often believe that the systems are created by us, but we look to systems for solutions, but we're the block or the problem. And so you might not know where that quote came from or what your belief is from what I'm referencing. So can you talk to me about how you help people identify the role they play in the limitations of their business versus the integration and implementation of successful systems to help them grow and scale?
Yeah, so I think I have a feeling the quote that you're referencing is probably, so what I see and what I've seen since I entered accounting is that it really is a broken model for business owners. That your typical accounting firm, right, like their whole model, whether you realize it or not, is what they call billable hours. So if I can spend the least amount of time on your job, I am going to be more profitable, which means I'm going to get a bonus if I'm at a big firm, and I'm going to be a win. You as the consumer don't know that, right? Like, you know that I have to watch my time, but you don't realize that my goal is actually to spend the least amount of time on your job and have you pay the same. And so that's fine if you're like a high net worth person who has the same tax return every year and the reports come from it makes sense, right? Like all your reports come from the same thing. So every year the goal is to be more efficient and we'll get a little better every year. So it's not like they're mean, big, bad people, but that model works if that's the type of tax return you're doing. If you're doing a business return, and I've seen this, and this is, I think, what turned me off of accounting, and I just wanted to go start my own business. I mean, when I started in accounting, it was 2007. So my first 6 months at the big firm was we lost a lot of clients because 2008 happened and people were scrambling and nobody knew what was going on. And even through this crazy turmoil of a time, there was never we're going to go give more of our time for our clients because they really need us now. Right? Like there was no even like, hey, by the way, this guy lost like $200,000. You think we should talk to him about it? Like, no, why would you ever talk to him about it? Did he ask you? I don't know if he asked me, but he lost 200,000. Like, this was such a tone deaf response that you're like, I don't even want to do that. Like, if this is accounting, I don't want to do that. Like, I want to help people, And so to me, when I tell people like system is broken, I think they don't realize how broken the accounting system is for the small business owner who doesn't know accounting. Right? If you have a CFO, great. But I've even I was at a business seminar 2 weeks ago, and their whole advice to people was to go hire someone who can translate your accounting for you as a business owner. And I'm like, But like fundamentally, shouldn't we just be able to translate this ourselves and not have another layer of a person who's going to have their own agenda? Like this to me is just a broken system.
Beautiful. Thank you. Because again, you just clarified the lack of congruency in my head, because I was like, what the heck is going on here? Because what I just heard you say too is, no. You are alleviating the shame and blame that the accounting industry has continued to point towards the business owner. Yes. And when you're pointing to that comment, you're saying it isn't you. You're not the problem. It's the system and how we've structured the way we do accounting, particularly for small business owners, that is the problem, and you deserve better. Yes. Okay. Thank you for the opportunity to clarify, because that is so in line with the empathy and heart that I felt the entire way. I was like, what do you mean? No, that's the protector in you. You're jumping in to say, no. I'm battling the old ways because they no longer serve my customers anymore.
Yes.
That is beautiful. I would love to know, because I have the sense that you're a protector in many areas in your life, and you probably care for a lot of people, maybe even a degree larger than you care for yourself. Where did that come from? And by the way, am I even correct? Because if I am, I'd love for you to expand on that, because I think it's a blessing and a curse, sometimes people in that situation. But you clearly have a strong, focused heart and mind that I see in a protectionary role often.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, I think in part, just seeing, like, my dad was an entrepreneur and his business failed when I was in 8th grade. And watching the other side of that has always made me very aware of, like, finances, how they affect family life. He just was never the same person after that happened. And yet when I was little, he was always like the dreamer, like entrepreneur, like this is so much fun. And then when it didn't work out, like he never got over it. And to me, especially in COVID, I think that was my protective, like instinct that took over, that I'm like, I am not letting this happen on my watch. Like, you guys have worked too hard and I know what the other side of this is. And it bothered me so much, the consultants that were out there that were just telling people to close, or just like, it's okay, it's not worth your time. And I'm like, you have no idea what this looks like when someone closes. Like the emotional failure aspect of that, even if on paper it makes sense to do it, like this is so much deeper than just we're going to plug the numbers and see if you should stay open or not. Like that is such crap for what it will do to these people's lives. And that's really, where I believe there just has to be a voice that's like, you've made all of these risks, all of this investment of time. There is a vision here. And if we can just find it and move you forward, your life will be different at the end of this than if you just walk away. And that to me has always been, but yeah, I mean, I think that comes from, my parents had no money in high school. Like I remember being the kid who lived in the horrible apartment and had to get rides to school. I didn't have a car. It was not good, and then you're playing golf with all these kids who have their parents are members of the country club, and it's, just such a disconnect. But it also was a very valuable lesson, because when I was in high school, we moved to South Florida, but there's also a lot of people who've been able to create a different background, like parents, families who'd come from South America, a family that come, and created a new life that was pretty nice, right? Like they have a big house and a boat, and you're like, wow, life is like this now, but it doesn't have to be like this, right? Like I can control my future and, have a better future. And I think that's, part of it too, is just trying to build out, making life better for everybody.
Yeah. And I'm a big fan of yours already, and I want to really just jump on top of what you just said and make sure that everybody who's listening today understands the level of giving with which you go to. This is pretty significant. One of the stats that I saw that I was really jumped out at me is that you donated over 600 hours in free one-on-one sessions to business owners looking for guidance throughout COVID. That is significant, particularly in an industry that, to your point, operates off of billable hours. Yeah. And so I just wanted to thank you, because you were one of the people that truly gave people light and love in a time that they needed it the most. And I know that I had a number of clients myself that a lot of their other professional advisors were giving them advice that was different. I had one client that literally communicated to his team they had 17 months of liquidity left in their business and they'd be closing their doors, right? 17 months, a lot can change in 17 months.
Right.
right? But this is literally what he was told because he was in the commercial real estate business for development, investing, and property management. And they were like, you're going inward, right? So sometimes it requires people to shine a light on what's possible. And I feel like you've done that a lot in your life. I'm curious, as it relates to the way that you manage intellect and emotion, what are the things that frustrate you?
That's a good question. I think, I think you get frustrated not being able to show people what you see, right? Like I think the benefit of what I'm able to do, or my job, is I'm the outsider looking in, right? Like it's your company, but I'm able to have insight. And I think at times it's frustrating if you see something and they just can't get there. Like the person in COVID who just can't see the future, and there's stuff there that's just, whether it's self-belief or self-confidence or whatever it is, like they can't get there. And I think that can be frustrating. And then like I said, I think the hardest thing for me is like the, wasted time, right? Like I don't watch a lot of TV, or just like people who just like, want to go home and sit at home and binge watch Netflix. Like that's frustrating because like we should do more with our day than that. So, I would say those are my frustrating things.
I would argue that you also have a similar thing that I've dealt with a lot in my life, is that I care more for people than they care for themselves in some situations.
Yeah.
And what's really interesting about what you said is that it has nothing to do with their capability. It has everything to do with their willingness and desire to get to where you want to be, right? What's clear in the way that you teach and educate is that you give people everything they need outside of themselves to be successful in understanding the accounting within their business and what's going on in the economy. Sometimes what accountants can't do and certain professionals can't do is actually help them navigate inside. And so that dynamic of me caring more for others than they care for themselves has been a balance and an integration that I've had to learn, because I also had to learn the number of people that wanted something from me versus for me. And so I'm really curious, that concept of wanting from versus wanting for, how that's either impacted you in your life, in your business, or how that's shown up. Because it's something I heard in the nuance of what you just said.
Yeah, I mean, I think, first of all, I think it is true that, the people that just can't get there, what I've learned is a lot of times it's that, like old stuff from your past, right? Like you were never told you were good enough, or you were never told that you really can. And I think a lot of times anyone who's, listening to this or thinking about that, it's like, do I fundamentally really believe in this dream? Right. And I think that also goes back to like a golf lesson, right? Like they always say, like, if you don't see the shot going in, don't make the shot. And I would say, I think that's probably the biggest thing I've learned from dealing with business owners for so many years. It's like, you almost want to say, do you really believe in the vision you told me? Because it feels like maybe you don't, right? Like, if you really believe that you're the next Chick-fil-A, like, why are we having this conversation, right? Like, so I think that sometimes is the biggest detriment, is like, do you really see it happening? Or is there a part of you that's just like, well, that's just a dream, right? Like, I'm really not going to get there. And that seems to be like the question that you can't answer for them. Like, you have to find a way to believe that you're the next Chick-fil-A, but it just isn't going to happen. And I think you're right, though, on the wanting more, you mentioned something that's very true of like the from you versus for you. And I think that's true with, in life, as we're dealing
relationships,
with a lot of people, relationships, it's part of it. So for me, I think I've really, like, especially in the last couple of years, I've found like, you're so emotionally drained by everything that's going on, especially COVID and, dealing with hospitality industry and just feeling for people and like, sad stories, and that you just want to help, that I've definitely, I think, tried to keep a tight bubble, and just really make sure that the people I am close with, that they know me, right? Like, it's not just who they think I am, but they know the real me. So I think I've actually like started to like rekindle relationships you had, in childhood or like relatives, because I do think there's an element of like finding that safe space of where you can just be you, and people love you for you.
I'm a big believer that what we all want is the same four things. We all want to be safe. We all want to be protected. We all want to be seen and understood. And we all want to be connected, right? We'll talk about that a little bit more, I'm sure, when you and I have a conversation later in the week. But you are clearly a protector. You are clearly a connector. And again, a strong belief we have is that the only thing that keeps most people stuck, and you just said it in this last thing, is the trash from their past. The stuff that's not been unpacked or processed and effectively understood how to move forward. And I'm a big believer that the trash from our past is an adversary in constant pursuit. There is no final destination, only constant evolution of self, right? And we have to be vigilant in our efforts to make sure that we're maintaining the awareness and intentionality to make sure that the trash from our past doesn't cause us to trip or bury others in it. And so I'm curious, because the vulnerability you've shown today is great. Is there trash from your past that's still holding you back in some way? And what's that trash you want to get rid of?
I mean, I think everybody has,
Everybody does.
Everybody does.
Everybody does.
And I think especially, like you said, as parents, you see it, right? Like you definitely see. But, I think, I'm a big believer in trying to deal with whatever comes up, right away, to not let that go by, because, you just know that it will build out. And I would say, I think for me, it's just really trying to, find a way. I think connections are to me where, I want to focus, especially in 23, because I think, that seems to have gotten lost the last couple of years of just really being able to connect with people and, form some good relationships. And especially I think when you're parents and your kids are young, you're kind of like in this bubble. But, for me, it would definitely be, connections.
Yeah, I would argue that it is the thing that we desire the most. And yet we've never been so disconnected as a society. Right. And I know that I disconnected myself unconsciously because of the level of protection I carried for myself from a whole variety of other things in my life. And I know that that is still one of the pieces of trash from my past that I constantly have to pay attention to. And so, really incredible. But we just went through this pandemic. Life is not the same. It's changed, and it caused a lot of people to armor way up and go way far into their shells. And so I know that a big part of what your focus is in the next stage is to make sure that everybody knows how they can operate in the new world and the new business model and the new systems that are being created as a result of it. Can you hit on that briefly? And then we're probably going to be wrapping up here relatively quick because you've shared so much of your time and wisdom with us.
Oh, yeah. No, yeah. I mean, I think whatever business you're in or what you're doing, I think the hardest thing is to come to terms with the fact that things will not be the same, right? Like we have fundamentally changed over the last 3 years. I mean, people say about, just society and tech and evolution and all of that, whatever it was, good or bad, it's just different. And I think the first part is just coming to terms with that, but also seeing that different doesn't have to be bad. And I think, the other thing that makes my perspective unique is that I started accounting in 2007. So as much as people now, talk about '08 and how horrible it was, and it was, right? Like I remember, clients going out of business, but I also remember that like life went on, right? Like I remember going out to lunch with colleagues in '08, right? Like, so we ate somewhere and the world didn't like completely fall apart. But I also remember on the other side of '08 was a lot of opportunity for the smaller business, because as things shift, it's harder to pivot, a giant 747 than it is a little biplane, right? So if you're paying attention, I truly believe, and I am an optimist, but I also am a realist in the fact that I truly believe there is incredible opportunity for the smaller, more agile business that can see and respond much quicker than the big guy. And so in '08, that proved it. If you look in '08, especially in hospitality, a lot of the bigger brands that you see today started during that time, because the big guys just slashed and burned, and it took them 5 years to recover, where the smaller guy could find the spot and open up in 6 months and, just make it work. So I truly believe that whatever we've been in the last year, and I think, just looking financially, really started in June, July of 22, we're pretty bad. And if you look at full year 22, I mean, the margins are gone for most hospitality restaurants. Their revenues are fine, but cost of goods were crazy. Labor was crazy. Operating costs are crazy. and the profit's gone. So whatever we were in, we've already been in. I don't believe there's like a big bad thing on the horizon that we haven't already seen. But I do think like we're probably 6 to 8 months away from that opportunity side, where the big guys are still reacting and you can kind of come in and write your own story for like the next 5 years. So that's really where I think people, if they focus and they look at their local environment, I truly believe there will be opportunity in 23.
Beautiful. And I was going to ask you for closing comments, but the reality was you wrapped that up with such a beautiful bow. I feel like it was perfect because you just gave people a gift. And so I will ask, is there anything else you want to leave people with? We're going to put all your contact information in the show notes. I want to make sure that people know how to find you, how to lean into the systems that you're creating, the education and the empathy with which you're leading with. So where can they find you? And if there's any final thought, go for it.
Yeah, so check out our website, thelagergroup.com. If you subscribe to our email list, we do free courses, free webinars all the time. We have a free Monday mastermind where we touch on just a short thought for the week that really can transform the way you think about your business. But, I think the biggest thing is just don't be afraid to dream big, because it really is possible.
I love it. All right, everybody. Well, that was another amazing episode, and Anne really flipped the lid and looked inside. She talked to us a lot about how loss led to clarity and conviction in who she is. She helped us understand that all of the moments of resistance in her life actually gave her the ability to realize that life exists on the other side. That if she continues to stay consistent in who she is and focusing strongly on refining who she is to create the quality relationships and connections in her life, then the protection will lead to connection, especially with the removal of expectation. Anne has understood what it looks like to look inside, flip her lid, scan her can, and identify and remove the trash from her past. What are you still holding on to? What can you learn from Anne in this whole period? And just like she so beautifully said, how do you grab back the pen from your life and take back control of writing your story from this moment moving forward? Whether it's in business, relationships, life, or health, you hold the pen if you choose to. Anne just showed us the way, and she's been swinging consistently and creating flow in people's lives and businesses for decades. Make sure to go find her, and until next time, flip your lid and scan your can.